Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking an absolutely unbelievable standoff from ancient history. It's known as the Battle of the Trench, or the Battle of Ahzab. Honestly, it is an incredible story of survival against all odds, where brilliant, out-of-the-box strategy met sheer human endurance. So let's dive right in.
I want you to think about this for a second. How did an army of just 3,000 defenders manage to survive a siege by an overwhelming, massive coalition of 24,000 soldiers? I mean, it sounds mathematically impossible, right? In ancient warfare, being outnumbered 8-1 while backed into a corner usually meant total annihilation, no questions asked. Yet somehow this defending force survived. Let's break down exactly how they managed this impossible feat. To piece together this ancient military thriller, we're relying directly on scholarly texts like the International Research Journal of Education and Innovation, right alongside historical commentaries like Tafhim el-Quran. We're going to neutrally map out the events exactly as these texts record them, just so we can really examine the brilliant political and military strategies deployed on the ground.
Section 1. The Gathering Storm.
To really grasp the desperation of this siege, we first have to look at the immense pressure the Muslims in Medina were already living under. Following a severe setback at the Battle of Uhud, they faced this continuous escalating hostility for months. By the second month after Uhud, they suffered the Raji betrayal, where preachers were killed or sold, and the Bir Mauna slaughter, which completely wiped out a deputation of young men. By month 3, there was a literal assassination plot by the Bani an-Nadir tribe, and by month 5, the Bani Ghatafan were actively preparing to attack. It was just a relentless drumbeat of hostility.
And all of this culminated in a terrifying threat: 24,000 troops. Abu Sufyan, the chief of the Quraysh, allied with exiled Jewish clans and various polytheistic tribes from Najd, like the Ghatafan, to form a massive coalition force. This combined, massive army marched on Medina. And to put that disparity into perspective, the defending Muslims only had about 3,000 men over the age of 15 who could actually fight. Like we said, they were outnumbered 8-1.
Section 2. The Unprecedented Strategy. Facing practically certain destruction, the defenders needed a total game-changer, an entirely new way of thinking. When Prophet Muhammad consulted his companions about this terrifying threat, a Persian companion named Salman Al-Farsi stepped forward, and he proposed something wild: digging a defensive trench. Now, this tactic was completely alien to Arabian warfare at the time. It was a brilliant, unexpected, out-of-the-box solution adapted from Iranian military strategies, aimed specifically at neutralizing that massive enemy cavalry.
So picture this. Medina was mostly protected by interconnected buildings and mountains, leaving only one highly vulnerable open area between Mount Ubaida and Mount Radij. To secure it, all 3,000 defenders, including the Prophet himself, worked tirelessly to excavate a trench 5 kilometers long and about 2.5 meters deep. It was literally engineered to be too wide for any horse to jump across. And the craziest part? They completed this massive physical undertaking in just 20 days, right before the enemy arrived.
Now, right in the middle of this grueling, back-breaking excavation, the historical texts actually record a really fascinating, highly significant event. The diggers hit a massive, unbreakable white rock. According to the accounts, the Prophet struck the rock with an axe 3 times, and each strike produced a flash of lightning. Following each flash, he prophesied future conquest for his followers, first Yemen, then Syria, and finally the Persian Empire. This narrative really highlights the deep spiritual, morale boosting that kept them going amidst such exhausting physical labor.
Section 3. The 27-day siege.
So the massive coalition army finally arrives, absolutely expecting to crush Medina, but they are entirely stunned by the trench. Unable to cross, they settle into a blockade to starve the Muslims out. Over these 27 days, the food shortages became so severe that companions tied stones tightly to their bare stomachs just to suppress the agonizing hunger pains. The texts even note that the Prophet revealed his own stomach, showing 2 stones tied to it. Guarding that trench day and night, they were at the absolute edge of human endurance.
The tension finally broke when a few famous Arab warriors managed to find a narrow section and crossed over. Among them was Amr ibn Abdud, a warrior so undeniably fierce that people literally trembled at his name. He stood there and taunted the starving defenders, shouting, "Where are the claimants of paradise? Is there anyone I can send to heaven, or he will send me to hell?"
When Amr issued that terrifying challenge, a young Ali stepped forward. The texts note that after asking for a volunteer 3 times, the Prophet gave Ali his own turban and sword. In a fierce, dust-clouded duel,
Ali defeated the giant, and the psychological impact of this was absolutely massive. The sheer terror of Amir's defeat caused the remaining infiltrators to immediately flee back across the trench in an absolute panic.
Section 4. Betrayal and Division.
Because, while the physical trench was holding firm, a sudden, unseen psychological threat emerged from within. The Muslims suddenly found themselves fighting a two-front war. Outside the trench sat Abu Sufyan's 24,000 enemy troops, but inside Medina, the Banu Qurayza, a Jewish tribe that originally had a cordial treaty with the Muslims, was convinced by a sneaking enemy chief to break it. Now think about this. 3,000 starving defenders were completely surrounded, with heavily armed, betrayed allies right behind them inside their own city walls.
And this brings us to a really striking story. The betrayers sent a spy to investigate the vulnerable forts housing the civilian women and children. But Hazrat Safiya, the Prophet's aunt, spotted him. Grabbing a heavy tent pole, she struck and killed the spy, then actually threw his head down the cliff towards the enemy camp. This incredibly bold action completely bluffed the Banu Qurayza. Assuming the civilian forts must be heavily guarded by the Muslim army, they totally abandoned their planned attack.
Meanwhile, the Muslims launched a brilliant covert operation of their own. A chief from the enemy Ghatfan tribe named Naim secretly converted to Islam, and he used his undetected position to play a very dangerous game of psychological warfare. First, he warned the Quraysh that the Banu Qurayza would betray them. Then, he went right to the Banu Qurayza and warned them that the Quraysh would abandon them. This masterstroke of misinformation completely shattered their mutual trust, stalling what would have been a devastating coordinated two-front attack.
Section 5. Why the siege failed.
Now, the enemy alliance was fracturing, sure, but 24,000 troops still remained camped right outside the trench. The true climax of this month-long standoff came in the form of extreme weather, which the historical texts describe as divine intervention. A violently severe storm hit the enemy camp. Freezing wind uprooted their heavy tents, overturned their cooking pots, and ruined whatever food supplies they had left. Exhausted, freezing, and paranoid, the coalition's spirit finally broke. Right before sunrise, Abu Sufyan ordered a full retreat.
So bringing it all together, why exactly did this massive siege collapse? Well, it was a perfect storm of factors. First, the trench itself completely neutralized traditional Arab cavalry tactics. Extreme weather, a month of bitter cold culminating in a devastating storm, absolutely destroyed enemy morale. Practically speaking, a massive army of 24,000 simply couldn't be fed indefinitely out there in the desert. The impending cultural taboo of fighting in the holy months put a ticking clock on the entire siege. And finally, that covert psychological warfare created the internal paranoia that fractured the alliance from within.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating question. Could a purely physical defense, just the trench itself, have survived this impossible situation without the covert psychological warfare and the unshakable unifying belief of those 3,000 starving defenders? It's pretty amazing to see how strategy, endurance, and psychology all had to perfectly align to survive the Battle of the Trench. Thank you so much for joining me today on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.